Hello, everyone. In this history, you can learn about the Night Watch, their duties, and the quiet ways they kept towns safe. Subscribe gently to follow more.
Have you ever wondered who listened when the town grew quiet, who kept walking when every other door was closed and every window went dark, when tradesmen banked their coals and children sank into blankets, who stayed awake, steady as the stars, to mind the streets that stretched between shuttered homes? The answer is the night watch ordinary men entrusted with an extraordinary promise, to stand between the calm of sleep and the little accidents that can grow into trouble if no one notices. What did a night watchman carry with him into those hours when footsteps seemed too loud and lantern light seemed too small? Not much, and yet enough. A hand lantern to press a circle of light into the dark, a wooden rattle to raise an alarm, if need came suddenly, a stout staff for authority more than force, and a ring of keys that opened gates, storage sheds, and the simple watch boxes where a man could warm hands for a minute before walking again. Were these tools complicated? No, but did they matter? Completely. A small light can guide a careful foot. A quick clatter can summon help faster than a shout. A staff can prevent a quarrel from becoming a fight. How did his night begin? Often in the bluish hour when the last streaks of daylight retreat and the first household candles go out. Did he hurry? Never. Hurrying at night makes noise and mistakes. He set a pace he could keep for hours measured patient, almost like breathing. He learned the town's quiet sounds and kept them in his memory. The creek where a gate never fits its post, the drip at the corner spout after an evening rain, the way the wind slides along a narrow lane and makes the shutter latches murmur. If any new sound appeared glass underfoot, a latch lifted twice, a cart moving when all carts should sleep. He heard it. Did he truly see in the dark? Only what his small lantern would allow. But he learned to read the dark the way a reader learns the margin notes of a familiar book. He knew how fog carries sound farther than clear air. He knew how moonlight makes a cobblestone look wet when it is dry, and how frost shines even when the sky is empty of stars. He learned to step softly, not to startle, but also to let his footfall be known when it would comfort. The steady 3 beat of boot leather on stone that said the town was not alone. What was he looking for? Not excitement. He hunted for very small things that most people never noticed because they were sleeping. Was there a thread of smoke where none should be? Then he traced it to a kitchen where embers were left. Too bold, and he waited while a drowsy householder raked them safe again. Was there a door tied open with a careless string so it couldn't latch? He found the string, untied it, and shut the door so the wind could not pull it wide. Did a dray horse worry at its tether, hooves striking sparks on stone? He soothed it, reset the knot, pressed its nose, and moved on. None of this was heroic. All of it was necessary. Did the night watch ever speak? Yes, though not much. He asked questions with a purpose and answered them just as simply. Who goes there? Was not a challenge, but a way to place a person. In the right story, resident, traveler, or someone needing help. Where are you bound? Guided a lost stranger back to an inn or to a safe road out of town. Is all well within? He might ask at a gate where worry showed in the face behind the bars. And if the voice said yes, he believed it and walked on. The watchman's talk was short, meant to keep the night from tumbling into confusion. What did he do when he found someone in need, sick, shivering, or far from home? He offered the plainest help, a walk to shelter, a share of the lantern's heat, a place to sit while a runner fetched a cart. He did not promise more than he could give, and that is why people trusted him. In the morning, when they told their stories of that long night, they always remembered the simple thing, the circle of light and the sure voice that kept them steady until the trouble passed. How did he keep time without clocks in every room? He kept it by the sky and by habit. He knew the feeling of midnight by the deepness of the quiet, the cool shift of air that slips under doors, the way dogs do not bark, but only breathe. Some towns gave him a sandglass to tip at each round, or a notched stick to mark off circuits of the streets. Others asked him to call the hours softly, so people could gauge their sleep, not to chase rust away, but to measure it. And if he called, he did it low and even, a meter more than a message, a reassurance that the night had a shape. Was he ever afraid? Of course. A night can hold too much stillness, and it is in stillness that the smallest worries slide forward. In the mind. But fear has less room when a man has a route, a duty, and a plan. He learned that courage was not a flame, bright and loud. Courage was a small, steady coal, kept alive under cupped hands. It warmed just enough to keep him moving, and moving was what the town needed most. Did the night watchman live apart from everyone else? Not really. He ate where others ate, traded at the same stalls, and fixed the same broken hinges on the same weary doors. But his work turned his eyes slightly different, so he noticed things in daylight that others passed by. He saw the gutter where water loved to gather before it froze. He noticed the board that always swung loose and knocked like a fist on windy evenings. He remembered the window whose latch never caught unless you lifted and slid it together. Daylight told him where night would go wrong, and he kept a list in his head. What did a round feel like? One complete circuit from gate to gate. It felt like a lesson written on the town itself. There was the alley where cats quarreled, and then curled into the same patch of sun when morning came. There was the pump that creaked when the bucket was full and sighed when the handle dropped. There was the courtyard where a wheel leaned against the wall like a tired shoulder. He checked them all, not because anything was happening, but because the habit of checking is how you prevent something from happening. Did he stand guard only against people? No. He minded the weather like a second set of footsteps. If the air sharpened, he expected frost on steps where someone might slip at dawn. If the wind shifted, he watched for a spark carried from a careless coal. If the fog rolled in from the river, he listened harder, because fog gives cover to haste and clumsiness as easily as it does to ill intent. He did not fight the weather. He walked with it, the way one walks beside a large animal, respectful, careful, alert. How did he raise an alarm without terrifying everyone? With proportion. A clatter from the wooden rattle could carry down a street and into courtyards without breaking the town's nerves. A shout with a name in it could gather the right hands quickly. Carter, Cooper, mill hand, whoever was needed. His aim was never to set the town aflame with fear, but to kindle just enough urgency to fix a problem before it grew. And when the trouble ended, he snuffed the alarm like a wick, letting quiet settle back into place. What of the small mercies he performed that no one ever thanked him for? He lifted fallen baskets from the road so wheels would not scatter their contents at sunrise. He turned a loose nail in a shutter with the tip of his staff so it wouldn't shriek each time the wind bent round the corner. He nudged a stray dog from a doorstep where an old man needed sleep. Were these tasks on a list? No, but a watchman who only answers big troubles leaves a street full of small ones, and small troubles have a way of becoming big if left alone. How did he end his night? Not with triumph, not with ceremony, but with the quiet satisfaction of an unremarkable dawn. The sky thinned from black to pearl. Smoke rose in slim threads from kitchen chimneys. Doors opened and steps were swept. He returned the keys, wiped the lantern glass, checked the oil, and noted the oddities of the night so the next man would carry them forward. A strap frayed on the north gate, a shutter loose by the granary, a step that iced quickly by the east. Alley. He did not ask for praise. He asked only that the streets he returned to the town at morning matched the streets he received at dusk. Was he paid much for this patience? Seldom, but his wage included something rarer than coin, the trust of people he hardly knew. They never saw his face clearly, only the light he carried and the sound of his steps, but they slept because of him. To keep another's rest is a kind of honor that does not glitter, but it is sturdy, and sturdiness is what a town needs in the dark. Did he ever think of his work as grand or historic? Perhaps not. He thought of it as continuous, like a line drawn around a sleeping household, thin but unbroken. Where the line dipped, at a gate, at a corner, at a crossing, he was there to pull it tight again. He knew that the best nights ended without stories. The finest shift is the one a town forgets because nothing happened. And what, finally, did the night watch teach the town about safety? That safety is not a barricade but a practice. It is the habit of noticing. It is the warmth of a faint light exactly where it should be. It is the sound of measured steps. It is the question asked before a mistake, the hand extended before a fall, the soft voice that turns confusion into a plan. The night watchman offered these things not because he was extraordinary, but because he was consistent. And consistency, night after night, is a stronger wall than any fence. If you look out at a sleeping town from a second-floor window, perhaps where the roofs meet the sky, you may imagine you see nothing moving. But look again, between the lines of shadow along the curb where the road gathers moonlight, there is a small arc of brightness that moves at a walking pace. That is the lantern in a steady hand. That is a man who knows the map of quiet, keeping the edges tidy while the rest of the world breathes in its sleep. And if you listen beyond your heartbeat and the soft settling of beams, you may hear the faintest evidence that the promise still holds. A hinge gently tested, a knot retied, a voice low and even saying that all is in order. So who guarded the town while it slept? Not a hero in armor, not a figure meant to be celebrated with trumpets and banners, only a person with good shoes, warm cuffs, and a dependable way of walking. He watched because someone had to, and because watching well, long after others have turned away from the window, is a kind of love for a place that needs no name. In this way, the night watch stitched the hours together until the first lines of morning light rested on lintels, and the day took its first breath without fear. Have you ever wondered what gave a night watchman the ability to keep order in a town where shadows ruled every corner? Could a single man really hold back danger with only a few objects carried in his hands? The answer is yes, not through force, but through the steady usefulness of simple tools and the quiet authority of habit. What did he carry first? Always a lantern. Without light, his rounds would have been blind. Did the lantern banish darkness? Not entirely. Its glow was small, casting a trembling circle just wide enough to see the stones underfoot and the outlines of nearby doors. But did it matter? Yes. The lantern announced his presence and gave reassurance to anyone who woke at night and glimpsed its soft flame through shutters. In a world where darkness covered everything, even a little light meant protection. What about sound? The watchman's wooden rattle or clapper could be spun in an instant, its harsh clack carrying down lanes and alleys. Was it meant to frighten? Not at all. It was a tool to summon help, neighbors, other watchmen, or guards at the gate. Did he use it often? Rarely. Too much noise would undo the calm of the night. But when he did turn it, everyone understood. The call. Why a staff? The staff was both symbol and shield. Did it make him a warrior? No, but it showed that he spoke with authority. Tapped lightly against stone, it told the sleepless that order was present. Held firmly, it could block a quarrel or steady a stumbling drunk before harm was done. Did it need to strike often? Seldom. Its very presence was enough. And the keys? These were not ordinary keys, but the means to open gates, doors of storehouses, or watch boxes. Why were they important? Because the watchman was responsible for more than wandering streets. He secured the town's entrances, checked that warehouses were safe, and kept a record of what he found. Did he misuse them? No, for trust was the core of his duty. A key, in the wrong hand, could cause harm, but in the watchman's hand it gave assurance. What were his duties beyond carrying tools? He was expected to mark the passing of hours, sometimes by calling the time aloud, sometimes by checking with a sandglass or notched stick. Did people need this? They did, for not every household kept a clock, and the sound of a steady voice announcing the hour has passed, all is well, was enough to soothe those who woke uneasy in the dark. Did he deal only with danger? No, much of his work was prevention. He checked for sparks in stables, loose shutters banging in the wind, or carts left untied that might roll. He reminded householders to bank their fires more carefully and guided late travelers to the proper inns. Was this glamorous? Not in the least, but it was practical, and it made the difference between a quiet night and one filled with trouble. So what defined the tools and duties of the night watch? Simplicity, steadiness, and presence. His lantern showed he was there. His rattle gathered help when needed. His staff carried silent authority. His keys opened what required attention, and his voice, calling the hour or offering a word of comfort, turned an empty street into a place watched over, not abandoned. In this way, the night watchman did not fight the night. He accompanied it, guiding it along until dawn broke, and the people of the town could rise knowing that their sleep had been guarded. Have you ever wondered what a town really sounds like when nearly everyone is asleep? Do the streets fall into complete silence, or is there still a hidden music that only a wakeful ear can hear? The night watchman knew the answer. For every evening he stepped into that hushed world and discovered that the silence was never empty. It was simply filled with smaller, softer sounds that required patience to notice. When his boots touched the cobblestones, the sound was not loud, yet in the stillness it carried. Each step echoed against walls, bounced off shuttered windows, and faded down narrow alleys. Did this bother him? Not at all. In fact, he welcomed the sound. It was proof that he was there, that his presence stitched together the darkness with steady rhythm. But he also learned to control it, sometimes walking more softly when he wished to listen rather than be heard. What filled the night? Besides his own steps, the sigh of the wind through the eaves, the distant creak of a hanging sign above an inn's doorway, the occasional rustle of straw as animals shifted in their stalls. A cat might leap onto a roof, its claws scattering loose tiles with a sound sharp enough to catch his ear. Even the river, hidden behind houses, spoke faintly, lapping against its banks or humming beneath bridges. To a sleeper, these sounds vanished into dreams. To the watchman, they were the pulse of the town at rest. Did he grow lonely in these hours? Sometimes. The streets belonged to him alone, and even the lamps seemed drowsy, their flames bending, low as if they too longed to close their eyes. But he did not think of himself as alone. Each house he passed was filled with sleeping lives, and his task was to protect that stillness. He found comfort in the thought that his footsteps, though solitary, carried the weight of many households, depending on him to walk them. As he turned corners, he studied shadows. A moonlit alley revealed more than it concealed, but in darkness he relied on his lantern's glow. Did he fear the shapes beyond its reach? No, fear would only cloud his judgment. Instead, he observed carefully. Was a barrel moved from its place? Was a cartwheel tilted oddly against the wall? Was a door ajar when it should have been closed? These were the questions he asked himself silently, night after night, turning observation into habit. Why was this attention so important? Because the smallest detail could signal larger trouble. A shifted crate might hide a thief crouched behind it. A loose shutter might strike sparks if the wind grew strong. A wagon left untethered might roll downhill with dangerous force. Did such things happen often? Rarely, but the watchman understood that prevention was the heart of his duty, not to wait for trouble, but to keep it from growing at all. Sometimes he met wanderers in the dark. Who were they? A traveler arriving late, guided by faint stars. A worker delayed at his craft, hurrying home after the tools were put away. A restless soul who found sleep elusive and walked the lanes to clear his mind. Did the watchman confront them harshly? Never. He asked short questions enough to know their purpose and offered guidance when needed. If someone looked lost, he pointed them toward the proper inn or gate. If someone looked troubled, he walked beside them until their path grew clearer. His role was not to accuse, but to steady, and in these moments his presence meant more than words. Even those who had nothing to fear felt calmer, knowing he was near. Imagine yourself in such a time, stepping through a dark lane where the windows above are blank. The air carries no sound but your own breath, and suddenly you glimpse a lantern approaching at a measured pace. Would you feel threatened? Or would you feel relieved to know that someone else keeps watch while the town sleeps? The answer for most was relief. At times the silence pressed heavily, and he broke it with a call, the marking of an hour spoken in steady tones. The clock strikes one, and all is well. Was this for his own comfort, or for others? Both, It reminded him that time was passing, that his rounds had rhythm. It reassured anyone awake that the night was under care. Did people ever complain about the noise? Perhaps a few, but more often they admitted that the sound soothed them, a human voice woven into the hush. Occasionally he paused at the heart of the town, where the market square lay empty under the moon. In daylight it was filled with carts, sellers, and voices. At night it was a hollow shell of stillness. What did he feel there? A strange mixture of calm and responsibility. The emptiness reminded him that his duty extended not just to houses, but to the very shape of the town itself. The square, the gates, the alleys, all were entrusted to his steps. It was during these pauses that he sometimes allowed himself a small thought beyond duty, that others, perhaps far away, might also enjoy hearing these quiet stories of the night. If you enjoy following along with this calm journey into the past, you may consider subscribing to the channel so you will be gently reminded when the next watch begins. Not a demand, simply an invitation, as steady and quiet as the footsteps themselves. Then he lifted his lantern again, checked the corners where shadows clung, and resumed his walk. Because the night, like his task, was not complete until every turn was taken, every silence was measured, and every household was guarded until the dawn. Have you ever wondered where a night watchman's duty truly began and ended? Was it only the streets within the town walls, or did his care extend to the gates, the riverside paths, and the fields that brushed the edge of the settlement? The answer was not always written in law, but in practice. The night watchman walked wherever the darkness could stretch, wherever a forgotten detail might turn into danger by morning. What did the edges of a town look like after sundown? At the gates, heavy timbers barred the main roads, yet small wicket doors sometimes remained open for those with reason to pass. Did the watchman linger there? Always. The gates were thresholds between safety and uncertainty. Beyond them stretched the dark countryside with its forests, tracks, and lonely farms. Within them lay the clustered safety of houses and hearths. His task was to make sure the threshold held firm through the night. At the river banks, silence took on a different shape. The water moved steadily, carrying the moon in ripples. Did the watchman patrol there as well? Yes, for the river was both lifeline and hazard. A cart left too near its bank could tip. A child wandering too close could fall. And though most stayed away at night, he checked, for the river did not sleep. What of the fields beyond the last cottages? They too belonged to his memory. He knew which paths led toward the mills, which hedges bordered orchards, which wells stood half a mile beyond the last lantern post. Did he walk them every night? Not always, but often enough to remind himself that the town's pulse stretched farther than its walls. For danger, after all, seldom asked permission to cross a boundary. Why did boundaries matter so much? Because they were where order thinned. Inside the market square, light still lingered from the last fires. Inside the lanes, people might stir behind shutters, but at the edges, the night was heavier, less certain. Did this frighten him? No, but it sharpened his senses. Every sound seemed larger, every shadow deeper, every change more noticeable. It was here, at the borders, that his patience became most important. How did he keep track of all these places? By walking them until they lived in his memory. He could close his eyes and trace each curve of the wall, each dip of the road, each hollow, where frost gathered more thickly than elsewhere. Did this knowledge come quickly? Never. It took months, even years of steady observation, but once learned it was never forgotten. The watchman carried a map in his mind, drawn not with ink, but with footsteps, and that map gave him confidence wherever his lantern led. Did he ever rest at the boundaries? Sometimes. He might pause at the gate to lean on his staff, lantern, glowing faintly against the wood. He might sit for a moment on a stone near the river, listening to the slow wash of water. He might stand in the fields, gazing back at the cluster of roofs glowing faintly under the moon. These pauses were not idleness, they were part of the work. A watchman who never stopped to listen could not tell whether the night was quiet or simply hiding something. What did he listen for? At the gate, the creak of timbers, or the rattle of iron bolts. At the river, the unexpected splash that might mean someone had fallen in. At the fields, the faint crack of branches that might suggest mischief or wandering. Did he always find trouble when he listened? Rarely. More often he found reassurance, the steady stillness of a night behaving as it should. But listening itself was the duty, for it meant that if something did go wrong, he would know sooner rather than later. How did the townsfolk see these boundaries? To them they were lines they seldom crossed after dark. Most stayed within their doors, trusting the watch to mind the rest. But in the morning, when they passed through the gates, drew water from the river, or stepped into the fields, they felt comfort in knowing that someone had been there, awake, steady, patient. The watchman's unseen footsteps gave weight, too, their confidence. And what did these long circuits teach him? That a town is not only its people, but its edges. The gates, the river, the fields, these too were part of its body, and like limbs, they needed care. Without them, the town could not breathe, trade, or grow. Did he ever resent the distance he had to walk? No, he saw it as necessary, part of the invisible work that let others rest easy. So the boundaries of the night became his second home. He walked them with the same care he gave to the square, the lanes, and the courtyards. And when dawn returned, those who passed the gates or fetched water from the river never thought to ask how the night had gone. They did not need to. The watchman had already ensured that nothing had disturbed the fragile balance between rest and safety. Have you ever wondered why a watchman could never allow himself to relax, even on the quietest nights? Why, when the streets seemed safe and the windows dark, he still walked with steady purpose, as though danger lay waiting behind every shadow. The answer lies in the truth of the night itself. Its dangers were seldom loud or obvious. They were hidden, waiting in small details, and it was the watchman's task to notice them before they grew. What kinds of dangers threatened the peace of a sleeping town? Not always the dramatic kind of danger we might imagine. Often they were ordinary things, magnified by darkness. A spark that escaped from a chimney, a door left ajar, a cart left untethered on a slope, a quarrel carried on too long after dusk. Each by itself seemed small, but in the silence of midnight, each held the power to unravel the safety of the whole community. Take fire, for example. Few threats were more feared in a town of timber beams, thatched roofs, and crowded streets. By day, smoke meant bread baking or wood being burned for warmth. But at night a curl of smoke where none should be was a signal of danger. Did the watchman often find fires before they grew large? Yes, for his eyes searched for the faint glow of embers, his nose tested the air for burning, and his ears listened for the odd crackle of flame. Sometimes he caught it in time, rousing a household to douse sparks before they spread. To the family it was a small inconvenience. To the town it was salvation. What about weather? Storms posed their own hazards. Strong winds could hurl roof tiles onto streets, tear loose shutters to bang like drums, or send signs swinging dangerously from their posts. Heavy rain pooled in low places, turning roads into slick traps where carts could overturn. Snow muffled sounds and slowed footsteps, making it harder for the watchman to hear trouble. Ice glazed steps and stones creating hazards for those who rose early. Did the watchman curse the weather? No. He accepted it as part of his task, walking carefully, learning which lanes iced over first, which gutters overflowed, which chimneys smoked when winds blew from the east. Each storm taught him something new about his town. Not all dangers came from nature. Some came from people. A traveler wandering in late, confused and weary, might stumble into trouble. A quarrel between neighbors could flare even after doors was shut, spilling into the street where tempers carried farther than reason. Thieves existed, too, though their courage often failed when they realized the watchman's steady lantern moved somewhere nearby. Did he fight such men often? Rarely. His presence itself was usually enough to scatter boldness into shame. The glow of the lantern and the sound of boots carried weight greater than any weapon. Yet the most dangerous element was carelessness. A farmer leaving his gate open so livestock strayed onto the lane. A cooper forgetting a barrel half full of rainwater that might topple and flood a cellar. A servant leaving a candle too close to straw. These were not crimes, but they were risks, and the watchman's sharp eyes turned them into corrections before they became calamities. Was he thanked? Not always. Many never knew he had intervened, but the absence of disaster was thanks enough. Did the watchman live in constant fear? No, but he lived in constant attention. His mind stayed alert to patterns. He knew the sound of normal silence and the sound of disturbed silence. He knew how a horse shifted when restless and how it shifted when startled. He knew how shutters rattled in steady wind versus how they rattled when forced by a hand. He turned these differences into knowledge, and this knowledge became his shield. The dangers of the night were hidden because they came wrapped in ordinariness. A spark was only a spark until it became a blaze. A door was only a door until it admitted someone with no right to enter. A puddle was only water until it froze into glass beneath morning feet. The watchman's gift was not that he battled enemies head-on, but that he treated every small thing with the seriousness it deserved. Sometimes hidden dangers revealed themselves suddenly. A loud crack in the distance, the rush of hooves down. A lane, the sharp cry of a voice. These jolted him to action. Did he panic? No. He hurried, but always with measured steps. Panic blinded, steadiness revealed. When he found the source, it was often less dire than it sounded. A sign breaking. Loose, a dog startled by shadows. But once in a while, it was real danger, and his quick presence made all the difference. So what kept the night safe? Not luck, not chance, but vigilance. The watchman's lantern was not merely a light against darkness. It was a symbol of attention, unbroken, of patience stretched across hours when others slept. The dangers of the night might have been hidden, but they were never hidden from him. Have you ever noticed that the night is not the same from beginning to end? The silence of early evening feels different from the silence before dawn. The watchman knew this well, for he walked through every hour, and each part of the night tested him in its own way. Some hours were gentle, filled with soft sounds and easy steps. Others were heavy, dragging at his strength and spirit. Yet all of them mattered, for together they formed the long chain of duty that stretched from dusk to morning. What were the earliest hours like? When the last market stalls were cleared and shutters drawn, the watchman began his rounds. Did the town fall silent at once? Not entirely. Some households still bustled as evening meals were finished, and laughter or voices might drift through windows. The watchman heard them as he passed, and they reminded him that life was still awake behind the darkening walls. These hours were the easiest, for company lingered in the air. But as the night deepened, the streets grew emptier. Doors stayed closed, and the few lamps burning inside houses dimmed. The watchman's lantern seemed brighter now, though in truth it gave the same light as before. Did the silence feel heavier? Yes. The absence of voices made his own footsteps louder, his own thoughts clearer. This was when small details pressed forward, the creak of wood, the sigh of the wind, the drip of water. Alone in the silence, he paid closer attention than ever. The hardest hours came just before dawn. Why were they hardest? Because fatigue settled into every muscle. The body longed for rest, and even the most disciplined mind struggled to stay sharp. The silence here was not peaceful, but dragging, as though time itself slowed to test his endurance. Did the watchman falter? Sometimes, but never enough to abandon his post. He leaned on his habits, his routes, and his memories of earlier nights. He whispered reassurances to himself that the sun would return, that the town would stir, and that his task was nearly done. It was during these dragging hours that his vigilance mattered most. A careless step, a missed sound, could undo the work of the entire night. So he pressed forward, boots steady, lantern lifted, breath marking the rhythm of his patience. His willpower kept the town safe as much as his tools. Even now, as you listen to this quiet history, you may find comfort in knowing that he never walked for himself alone. He walked for every sleeper, every child, every household that depended on silence staying safe until dawn. And if you enjoy joining me on this calm journey into the past, you might gently subscribe to the channel so you will always find the next story waiting for you. Not a demand, only a quiet invitation, as steady as the watchman's footsteps. Through the night, so what did the hours of the night reveal? That darkness is not uniform. It shifts and changes, testing strength in different ways. The watchman endured them all, and by enduring, he gave the town what it needed most, the assurance that even when time dragged slowest, someone remained awake, steady, and unafraid. Have you ever thought about how long the night really is when you must walk every moment of it? To most people, the night is a simple span. They close their eyes, drift into sleep, and open them when daylight returns. For the night watchman, however, the night was not a single stretch of darkness, but a series of hours, each with its own character, its own test. Some hours passed lightly, as if carried by gentle wind. Others pressed heavily, slow and stubborn, as though time itself resisted being moved forward. And through them all, the watchman had to remain steady, for the town depended on his vigilance. Across every breath of night, what were the first hours like? These belonged to twilight, when the market stalls were pulled down and shutters clapped shut one after another. Voices still lingered in the air, carrying laughter, talk, and the clatter of dishes being cleared from supper. The watchman stepped into his role during this time, adjusting his lantern, setting his pace, and feeling the world narrow around him as the town transitioned from busy to still. These hours were easy, for the air still held warmth and the presence of other lives. It was not yet loneliness, but companionship fading, like the afterglow of sunset. How did he feel in these first rounds? Alert, but not strained. He watched for doors left carelessly open, for wagons blocking lanes, for fires that needed banking. He spoke with those still abroad, a late merchant securing his cart, a family returning from travel, a servant carrying buckets. His words were brief but not unfriendly. In these hours he felt like part of the town's life, moving among people who had not yet surrendered to sleep. But as the evening deepened, the tone shifted. Lamps went out one by one, shutters grew darker, and the murmur of voices ceased. The watchman's lantern grew more pronounced, its glow no longer competing with light from windows, but standing alone against the dark. Did he fear this moment? Not fear, but respect, for it marked the true beginning of his work. From here onward he carried the responsibility alone, his footsteps the only human sound along the lanes. What did the streets offer him then? A tapestry of small noises and silences. A shutter rattled when the wind touched it. A loose sign groaned above a shop. Somewhere in a stable, a horse stamped. The river murmured beyond the houses, its sound, low and steady. Each of these he marked, and if anything seemed unusual, he stepped closer, raised his lantern, and judged whether it needed correction. More often than not, it was nothing, but he checked all the same, because the essence of his duty was not to assume. As the hours moved toward midnight, the character of the night changed again. Now the town was fully asleep, and silence settled deeper. Did this silence comfort him? In part, yes, but it also weighed heavily. His lantern swung before him, cutting a narrow arc of light. His staff tapped occasionally on stone. Beyond these, there was little. Even animals slept more deeply at this hour. It was in this silence that imagination could stir, a shadow seeming larger than it was, a sound stretching longer than it should. The watchman trained himself not to let imagination rule. He measured each detail calmly, refusing to turn small things into terrors. What of the hour itself? Midnight had weight. To those asleep it meant little, just another turn of rest. To the watchman, it marked a dividing line. The night was half gone, yet still half remained. Fatigue began to stir in his limbs, and weariness crept into his mind. Did he falter here? Sometimes, but never fully. He leaned on discipline, repeating familiar routes, focusing on tasks. Calling the hour aloud helped as well. Midnight has struck. All is well. These words were not only for the sleepers who might hear them, but also for himself, a steadying rhythm to push him onward. After midnight came the slowest hours, the time when the town seemed most utterly deserted. No voices, no lamps, not even the faint stir of late sleepers. The air grew colder, the silence deeper, and his own body demanded rest. These were the hardest tests. How did he resist sleep while walking streets that begged for stillness? He kept moving. He let the rhythm of his steps anchor him, let the swaying lantern keep him steady. He hummed low to himself, or tapped his staff gently, enough to break monotony. His mind, though tired, remained fixed on duty. What dangers threatened in these dragging hours? Ironically, not bold dangers, but quiet ones. Fire embers smoldered unnoticed. Water froze across steps, waiting for morning feet. Animals grew restless, kicking against stalls. A thief might risk testing a door, thinking the watchman's energy lowest. The watchman knew this, and so he sharpened his senses most of all. When fatigue pressed hardest, he reminded himself that his people were deepest in sleep now, most defenseless. His strength had to cover their weakness. Did he find beauty even in these difficult hours? Yes, though it came quietly. Frost glittering under starlight. Mist curling across a river bridge. The distant cry of an owl fading into silence. These moments did not erase the struggle, but they gave it shape. He realized he was the only human. Witness to such sights, the keeper of memories no one else would know. Perhaps that, too, was part of his duty, not just to guard but to notice, to carry forward the unseen beauty of the night. And then came the last stretch, the hours before. Dawn. Many say these are the most wearying of all, for the body knows daylight approaches, but does not yet see it. The sky remains dark, yet the air hints faintly of change. Did the watchman feel this? Deeply. His eyes grew heavy, his steps slowed. The silence pressed hardest here, but he pushed forward, knowing he had almost carried the night through. He reminded himself that dawn depended on his endurance. If he failed now, the town would wake to danger. That thought steadied him more than any rest could. In these final hours he often revisited the gates, the river, the square, confirming once more that all was safe. He checked locks, noted small shifts, and tightened ropes. He did this not because he expected trouble at the last moment, but because finishing strong mattered. The night was not truly safe until the first light touched the rooftops. How did he feel when dawn at last arrived? Relief, certainly, but also satisfaction. The watch was not about glory or triumph, but about continuity. Another night had passed. Another town had slept safely. Another chain of hours had been carried link by link until daylight returned. His role was invisible to most, but essential. He had borne the silence, endured the fatigue, and steadied the fragile hours when all others lay vulnerable. And as you listen now, walking with him in imagination, consider how much patience and discipline this work required. Few could endure the full length of a night, from twilight to dawn, without faltering. Yet he did it night after night, turning ordinary hours into a shield around his community. If you enjoy sharing in these calm journeys through the past, you might quietly subscribe to the channel, so each new story will wait for you like the next watch on a silent street. This is not asked with urgency, only with the same steadiness that carried the watchman through his rounds. So what do the hours of the night truly reveal? That time itself can test a person as much as any task. The watchman faced silence, fatigue, weather, and hidden dangers, yet he walked them all without fail. And in doing so, he proved that safety is not won by sudden acts, but by constant attention, stretched patiently across the long, dark span between dusk and dawn. Have you ever wondered whether the watchman truly walked alone? From a distance, it may have seemed so. One lantern moving steadily through empty streets, one figure pacing under the moon. But in truth, he was never without companions. The night itself, with its sounds, animals, and shifting weather, walked beside him. His senses, sharpened by duty, made these companions vivid, even when they were silent. What were his first companions? Always the animals. Dogs stirred in their yards, lifting heads when his lantern's glow passed by. Some barked, sharp and brief, then settled again when they recognized the steady rhythm of his steps. Cats slinked along walls, their eyes catching the light like tiny lanterns of their own. Horses shuffled in stables, the creak of harnesses faint in the distance. Even owls, invisible in the dark, left traces of their presence in low hoots that echoed faintly across rooftops. Did he welcome these sounds? Yes, for they reminded him he was not alone. Each animal was part of the fabric of the night, alert in its own way. Dogs warned him of movement before his eyes could see it. Horses reacted to scents he could not sense. Birds shifted restlessly when something passed unseen. The watchman read these cues as carefully as any written report. What other companions shared his walk? The weather itself. The wind carried voices from farther than normal, allowing him to hear the faint call of a cart beyond the walls. Fog wrapped him in stillness, muting his lantern's glow until the world shrank to a few steps. Rain tapped out rhythms on roofs, sometimes so steady it became a kind of music. Snow muffled every sound, making his footsteps deep and solemn. Each change in weather altered his round, forcing him to adjust, to listen differently, to move with greater care. But perhaps the strangest companions were the sounds of houses themselves. Did buildings sleep? In a way, yes. Roof beams creaked as they cooled in night air. Shutters rattled lightly. Water dripped through gutters. To the watchman, these noises were familiar and reassuring. If something new joined them, the shatter of glass, the sudden opening of a latch, it stood out immediately. By learning the language of quiet structures, he gained a map of what belonged and what did not. What about people? Though most slept, he occasionally crossed paths with others. A physician called out late to tend a patient. A messenger sent on urgent business. A laborer delayed by work. These encounters were rare but meaningful. The watchman guided them through dark lanes, offering safety and direction. Sometimes a few words passed between them, short, practical, but steady. For the lonely traveler, the lantern's glow meant relief. Yet his greatest companion was silence itself. Did silence speak? Yes, though softly. It told him when all was in order. It calmed him when the night stretched long. But it also tested him, for silence could feel heavy and endless. He learned to carry it as one carries a weight, not fighting it, but balancing it. In silence he heard himself more clearly, his thoughts, his fears, his determination. And so the watchman never truly walked alone. The night gave him animals, weather, houses, people, and silence as companions. Some warned, some comforted, some tested. All reminded him that even in the loneliest hours he was part of something larger. His lantern might have seemed small, but it moved within a living world, steady and watchful, like himself. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to carry the safety of an entire town on your shoulders? Not just for an hour, not just for a single task, but for every moment of the long night? The night watchman bore this responsibility quietly, without banners, without applause, and without fanfare. It was not a role that brought glory, yet it demanded more from him than most could imagine. His duty was simple in words but vast in meaning, to keep the night steady so the town could wake in peace. What gave weight to this responsibility? First, the very nature of night itself, darkness concealed, blurred, and disguised. What looked safe by daylight could become dangerous under moonlight. A stable that seemed sturdy might reveal sparks in the hay. A road that seemed harmless might freeze into ice. A corner that looked empty might hide movement. The watchman's responsibility was not only to see, but to anticipate, to walk with eyes, ears, and mind all sharpened, because others depended on him to notice what they could not. Did he think of himself as carrying lives in his hands? In truth, yes. A missed ember might mean fire, a missed cry might mean harm, a missed shadow might mean theft. Every decision mattered because he often stood between danger and safety, yet he did not dramatize it. Responsibility was simply woven into his steps, as natural as breathing. He did not ask whether it was fair or easy. He only asked whether it was done. What did the townsfolk expect of him? They expected quiet reliability. They wanted to sleep without worry, to wake to streets as calm as when they closed their doors. They did not want stories of heroics. In fact, they preferred that nothing unusual ever occurred. The best nights were the ones forgotten. Did this lessen the watchman's role? No, it made it heavier, for he had to give them safety so ordinary that they did not think of it at all. His success was measured by absence. Absence of fire, absence of theft, absence of alarm. How did he carry such an invisible burden? Through discipline and memory. He repeated his rounds as faithfully as the turning of an hourglass. He stored the town in his mind, which shutters rattled in strong wind, which doors stuck in their frames, which dogs barked too easily. By remembering, he prevented forgetfulness from becoming disaster. Was this exhausting? Yes, but it was also his shield. Memory turned the unknown into the expected, and expectation kept him steady. Did he ever feel overwhelmed? Naturally. The silence before dawn, when weariness pressed hardest, made the responsibility feel almost crushing. But he reminded himself that he was not asked to hold the night forever, only to hold it until morning. This thought made the task bearable. Each step was not an endless march, but a single link in a chain, and when the chain was complete, the night would yield to day. How did he keep his sense of purpose alive? By remembering that his responsibility was not abstract, but human. Behind every shutter lay lives, children sleeping, parents resting after long work, elders needing quiet to regain strength. He imagined them as he passed, and the thought turned his fatigue into strength. He was not walking for empty houses, but for people who trusted him without ever seeing him. What about trust? It was the silent bond between him and the town. The people rarely thanked him directly, yet their peace depended on his work. Did this trust weigh him down? Sometimes. But it also lifted him, for trust is a kind of invisible support. Knowing that others believed he would do his task gave him courage to continue. He could not betray that faith, for it was both his burden and his honor. Did he ever wish for rest in the middle of his rounds? Often, but rest was a luxury that could not outweigh responsibility. A watchman who slept while others slept was no watchman at all. So he carried on, measuring his duty not by comfort, but by the town's safety. He endured the cold, the silence, and the long hours because his responsibility demanded it. And what does the weight of responsibility teach us now? That true duty is not loud, not celebrated, but steady. The watchman bore his task without applause, without visible reward. Yet his quiet service shaped the life of the entire town. Each uneventful morning was his unspoken achievement. The responsibility was heavy, but his shoulders grew strong enough to carry it, night after night, year after year. So what was the weight of the watchman's responsibility? It was the weight of silence kept safe, of dangers prevented, of trust unbroken. It was heavy enough to bend any man, yet it was carried without complaint. And in that quiet endurance lay the deepest strength of all. Have you ever asked yourself why someone would willingly walk through long nights, facing silence, cold, and weariness for so little recognition? Why would a man take on a duty where success meant being forgotten and failure meant only blame? The answer lies in the quiet rewards that shaped the watchman's life. They were not loud, not celebrated, but they were real enough to keep him steady night after night. What was the first reward? Trust. The townsfolk may not have praised him openly, but they trusted him. They closed their shutters with confidence, knowing someone was awake on their behalf. This silent trust was worth more than gold. It meant he was woven into the life of the town, invisible yet essential. Every morning that passed without alarm was proof that he had done his work. Did he need thanks? Not always. Trust itself was thanks spoken in the calm rhythm of daily life. What about safety? He felt pride when he saw children run to school unharmed, when merchants opened their stalls to streets untroubled, when families greeted each other in peace. He knew he had helped make this possible. His reward was not applause, but the sight of life unfolding as it should, unbroken by disaster. That quiet normalcy was his greatest achievement. Did he ever feel satisfaction in small victories? Certainly. A shutter secured before a storm, a spark doused before it grew, a stranger guided safely to shelter. These were minor acts, often unnoticed by others, yet they were triumphs to him. Each meant he had tipped the balance away from harm and toward safety. Each confirmed that his vigilance mattered. Were there moments of beauty that rewarded him? Yes, and they were perhaps the sweetest of all. The moon silvering rooftops, frost glittering on cobblestones, mist drifting like breath across a bridge, the dawn breaking slowly, painting the town in pale gold. These sights belonged almost solely to him, for few others were awake to witness them. He collected them in memory, treasures that no one could take away. Did companionship play a role in his rewards? In a way, he was not often joined by people, but animals marked his rounds. A dog that wagged its tail at the sight of his lantern, a cat that brushed past his boots, a horse that stamped, as though recognizing him. These small gestures gave him comfort. They reminded him that even in the loneliest hours, life acknowledged his presence. And what of his own spirit? Responsibility did not only weigh him down, it lifted him as well. To endure the night was proof of his strength. Each time he resisted fatigue, each time he overcame fear, he grew more certain of himself. The watch taught him discipline, patience, and steadiness, rewards that shaped his character beyond his duty. Sometimes he reflected that his life's rewards might seem invisible to others. They could not measure the trust he carried, the peace he preserved, or the beauty he witnessed. But he knew that these things mattered. He understood that greatness is not always found in fame, but often in the quiet strength of unseen service. And as you walk with him now through this story, you may feel a small piece of that quiet satisfaction yourself. If these calm journeys into the past bring you peace, you might gently subscribe to the channel so you can join the next story as easily as stepping into the next round of the Watchman's Walk. Not a demand, only an invitation, steady and calm like his lantern swinging in the dark. So what were the quiet rewards of the night watch? They were trust, safety, beauty, companionship, and strength. They were invisible, yet deeply real. They were not shouted from rooftops, but carried silently in steady footsteps. The watchman's reward was not to be remembered in glory, but to know that, because of him, others could forget the night entirely. And in that forgetting lay his triumph. Have you ever wondered what became of the night watch when the world changed? When new systems of order appeared, when towns grew larger, and when lamps replaced lanterns? The answer is that the old watch faded, quietly, much like the night itself fades into dawn. But their memory lingers not in monuments or stories of great battles, but in the calm rhythm of lives that were protected by their patience. At first, the change was slow. Towns expanded, and with expansion came new needs. Roads stretched farther, markets grew busier, and the demand for organized safety increased. Did the old system of lone men with lanterns still suffice? Not entirely. Larger streets required more than footsteps. Swelling crowds required more than one calm voice. And so, gradually, new forms of order were introduced, organized patrols, structured duties, systems that echoed the night watch, but extended beyond it. Did the watchmen resist these changes? Not in bitterness. They understood that time reshapes duties. Their task had always been to serve, and if service now required new tools or greater numbers, they accepted it. Some even joined the new patrols, carrying with them habits of vigilance honed through years of lonely rounds. Their steadiness became the foundation of what followed. What about the townsfolk? Did they mourn the passing of the old watch? Perhaps quietly, but more often they simply adapted. They still wanted the same thing: safety during sleep, peace during night, trust that dawn would come without disaster. Whether it was carried by a single man with a lantern or by a group with new, methods mattered less than the assurance itself. Safety had always been invisible, and it remained so. Yet traces of the watch endured. In some places, the tradition of calling the hour lingered long after formal duties ended. People still remembered voices drifting through windows. Midnight has struck, all is well. Even when clocks grew common, this memory lived on. In other places, the old watch boxes remained, small wooden shelters where men once warmed their hands. They stood empty, but they reminded passers-by of those who had once filled the night with quiet vigilance. Did the memory of their service fade completely? No. It settled into culture, into sayings, into the shape of towns. Streets widened where watchmen once patrolled. Gates strengthened where they once stood guard. Customs of locking doors, banking, fires, and checking latches passed into habit, taught by generations who had seen the watchman's example. Though his name was seldom remembered, his influence endured in the very way towns kept themselves safe. What does the fading of the night watch teach us now? That no duty lasts forever, yet every duty leaves something behind. The men who walked in silence did not expect monuments, but their patience became part of the foundation upon which later systems of safety were built. Their footsteps echoed into institutions, and their lanterns lit the way for methods that followed. And what of the watchman himself, standing at the end of his service? Perhaps he felt both relief and sorrow. Relief, because his long nights were over. Sorrow, because the silence he had carried now belonged to others. But above all, he likely felt satisfaction. For years he had endured the hours, faced the cold, resisted sleep, and guarded the vulnerable. Now the burden could pass, but the worth of his work remained. Imagine him one last time, lantern in hand, staff tapping lightly, boots pressing cobblestones that glimmer faintly with frost. He walks a final round, not because duty demands it, but because habit does. He pauses at the gate, checks the bolts, listens to the river, glances at the fields. He stands in the square, hearing in memory the echoes of all the nights before. Then, as dawn rises, he lowers his lantern and knows his task is complete. So what was the true legacy of the night watch? It was not fame or celebration. It was the calm gift of safety given night after night, without demand for recognition. It was the proof that vigilance and patience can guard a community more surely than any wall. It was the lesson that strength is not only in swords or shields, but in steady footsteps that never falter. And as this history closes, you may carry with you the same quiet assurance the townsfolk once felt, that somewhere someone's patience has kept the silence safe. That vigilance, though unseen, holds great power, and that even the most ordinary lives can shine with meaning when they are given in steady service to others. The watchman is gone now, but the peace he gave remains. His lantern may no longer swing in darkened lanes, but his memory lights a path into understanding how safety is built, not in glory, but in quiet endurance. And though his name is lost, his story endures, as steady, as gentle, and as patient as the steps that once guarded the sleeping town.